Today, guys, we're going to talk about another interesting topic, and hopefully, you guys don't experience this to too great of extent without any proper safety equipment. But today, we're going to talk about free fall. And we talked about free fall before in this class, and that's when just like we drop an object, Mr. Shaw will drop books. You guys dropped different objects in the hallway, and we calculated free fall. And things we remember from free fall is that the v and I'm going to keep the y in there. Vyi is 0 meters per second. Now remember, I put this Vy, the y there, guys, is telling me that it happens in the x-axis. And then, sorry, complete mess up there. The y tells us that it happens in the y-axis. Oh my goodness, Mr. Shaw. Have you been drinking? No, I have not. So, the Vyi, is going to tell us that this object moves in the y direction. And the Ay, well, that tells us we have acceleration in the y direction as well. Now, we all know from personal experience what pulls us down? It's gravity. And I'll say it's negative g, just to be very, very clear. That we are pulled down by negative gravity, which is negative 9.81 meters per second squared. So that means when you jump up in the air, gravity is what pulls you down, and we have said that that direction, the y, is going to be negative. Okay? So this is the basic concepts of free fall. We've got an initial velocity of 0, and gravity is the only thing that pulls us down. Well, let's take a look at a free body diagram of this. What might a free body diagram of this particular situation look like? Well, when you drop an object, is there a force that pushes it up? No. Is there a force that pushes it to the left? No. Is there a force that pushes it to the right? No. The only force that acts on an object, when we talk about it in this class in the simplest of senses, the only force that acts on the object is the force of gravity. And the force of gravity is what's going to pull it down. And that's very interesting. But we all know that there's something else very interesting when objects move through the air on the planet Earth. And then we have something that Mr. Lee touched on I think Thursday or Friday that's going to change some things. We're going to have a new concept, and that's going to be called air resistance. And let's give it a name. We can call it, it's a force of friction, and it's going to oppose motion. He said that, and it's very important, guys. When you think of air resistance, I don't know why it keeps doing that. It's going to oppose motion. Air with an R. Come back. Up, come on. There we go. There's kind of an R. So it's going to oppose motion. So whatever it's going to do, wherever direction you go, air resistance is going to want to act in the opposite direction, and it's always going to act to slow you down. It's going to inhibit you. It's like you know, it's like if you were to run with a parachute. If you have a parachute behind you, a parachute is an object that has a great deal of air resistance, and it's always going to keep you from going fast. Now, when you jump out of a plane, let's take a look. Hope you guys don't do this weekend, without a parachute at least. So let's put it at time 0. At time 0, when you, whoa, that did not look like a T. At time 0, when you jump out of a plane, or at 0 seconds, when you have just left that plane, you will have a force of gravity pulling you down. Okay, I think we've all got that so far. But what's your velocity? Well, at time 0, your Vi is 0, so you should have no velocity, so you should have no air resistance. But as time goes on, so I'm going to go to T1. Now, your force of gravity is not going to change. It's going to stay the same. But as time goes on, the important thing that we should realize is as you fall, velocity is going to start to increase, right? As you fall, you're going to start traveling faster and faster. This is our velocity right here. And we'll call it V1 because it's at time 1. And your velocity is going to get bigger and bigger. So let's do a couple more of these, and then we're going to get into what we're going to backtrack. So let's have a T2, a T3, of course, T3, and T4. So what we'll see is this, guys. Once again, I really want to stress our force of gravity is going to be the same for all of these. Gravity doesn't really change very much as long as we're close to the Earth. Now you guys all should realize that if we go into deep outer space, far away from Earth, we're gonna decrease that gravity. But right now, you're in a plane, you're above Earth, or you've just jumped out of a plane, and you should see a force of gravity that's going to stay the same for this descent. So let's call this. Let's put it off to the side to save ourselves some room. Force of gravity, and force of gravity. Now, one thing guys should be taking away from this class, though, is as we drop something, what happens to its velocity? Well, the longer it falls, its velocity is going to increase more and more, and it can keep going on more and more and more. But we're going to see something that's going to inhibit it from growing to a certain point. So as our velocity, so here we have v2, v2, we have v3, I don't know why it keeps doing that, and v4, 2, make a 2, oh well, whatever. This right here is a 2. Alright, that looks better. So v1, v2, we see our velocity increases, but we should also see something else happens. Now remember, if you move your hand through the air in front of you, just take your hand and move it back and forth, you will feel air push it. And the faster you move your hand, I'm actually doing it right now in my living room, the faster you move your hand, the more you will actually experience air pushing against your hand. And that's because the faster an object travels, the greater this force of gravity gets. So actually right here we're going to have a small, not force of gravity, air resistance. Here we'll have a small air resistance. Here we're going to have a little bit bigger air resistance, because once again guys, the faster we go, the greater this air resistance is going to get. And soon we're going to get, obviously it's getting a little annoying because of where I put my times, but soon we're going to get a point, guys, where our force of air resistance is going to be equal but opposite to our force of gravity. So let me write some things down real quick. As velocity, oh my goodness, as velocity, that's a v, increases, oh my goodness, this is really, increases, so does the force of air resistance. Okay, that's pretty interesting. So as velocity increases, so does the force of air resistance. Sorry about this. These letters, these lines, they just seem to morph after I've done with them. As velocity increases, I know that doesn't even look like the word increases, so does the force of air resistance. So as our object falls, its velocity gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And as its velocity gets larger and larger, so does the force of air resistance. And it's up here in this green line. Let's properly label it in each of these. This is my force of friction. Force of friction. Force of friction. Force of friction. Now, hopefully you guys are seeing a trend. Eventually, we're going to reach a point where the force of friction equals the force of gravity. Now, we're going to have two equal but opposite forces. What happens when we have two equal but opposite forces? Well, the forces are going to cancel out, and you will be at equilibrium. Equilibrium when Fg equals Ff. And the very cool thing that we're going to reach then, guys, is a cool state. Somebody may have heard of it. It was in a movie. It's actually the name of a movie with with Charlie Sheen. I know he's been in the news lately. It was called terminal velocity. Terminal, that's an R. Terminal velocity. And that's very interesting, guys, because remember, when we're at equilibrium, we have constant velocity. And actually, there's a point as you fall, you will reach a certain point where you stop accelerating. You will just have a constant velocity. It is, in fact, terminal. It is the last velocity that you will have before you hit the ground or initiate your parachute. So that is really, really cool. So we actually have a terminal velocity, and that's based on your air resistance. So cats, this is always a great question. Why are cats so good from falling from great heights? Well, because they have such great air resistance, they have a low terminal velocity. So because their air resistance is so large, this FF gets big and it gets big fast. so that the cat doesn't have time to build up enough velocity, has a low terminal velocity, so it hits the ground and lands safely. Okay, maybe I'll have another video later today about cats and parachutes. But thanks for listening, guys.